Alright, so this is Communication Studies Chapter 2, and if you haven't got a chance yet, you should really look at Chapter 1 because this is a continuation. Um, just look for the recording. I would have posted it, and you can catch up yourself before listening on this one. So, this one deals with the modes of writing. And as you can see, the outline here, or what we're going to learn about today in Chapter 2, is you're going to learn what are the modes of writing, how to use different writing modes, learn terms relating to writing modes, and know the minor writing modes. So it's all about writing modes. And here we go. So the three modes of writing, and all of them have different parts, but we're going to start with argumentative. But the three modes are narrative and descriptive, expository or exposition, and argument. Actually, we're going to start with exposition. So, expository writing. Expository writing is used to convey factual information instead of creative or fiction. Expository reading would be reading for learning and understanding the world. And if you did watch the first one, Chapter 1, you would know that learning for understanding is efferent reading, while reading for pleasure is aesthetic reading. So expository writing, usually when you read that writing, you're doing efferent reading because it's about factual, and you're going to learn something when you read expository writing. Or well, most of it. So, for the example, we have an encyclopedia entry. If you wrote this or read it, that is expository reading and writing. And also a how-to article on a website, engaged in expository reading. And if you wrote that article, that was expository writing. Also, a chapter in a textbook would definitely be expository reading. When you usually use expository writing, you would do it in like a project at school, or like a essay for school about something. You'd use expository writing most of the time. But moving on. Exposition is used in our daily lives, especially in conversation, and far more than the other modes in conversation. So, expository writing addresses the following questions: how, what, when, where, who, and why. For example, if I were to say, how are you doing? I'm asking this question to gain some information or gain some knowledge on your current state of mind. And that is expository right there. Also, if I were to ask, what are you doing? Or when do we leave? Or where are you right now? Or who are you going with? Or why did you do something? All those questions, using those six words actually you see here, are engaging in that expository action or expository conversation, because you're doing it for knowledge, right? Which is seen in the definition before. So we now move on to process explanation, and this is a form of expository writing. All the different modes has different forms in them, or well, most do. So process explanation is the first form that I'm going to look at in expository writing, and this is a common form of expository writing, like I mentioned before, and it involves an explanation of a process and is more concerned with how something is done rather than why. I have two great examples here. So I have baking a cake. Now, usually when you're baking a cake, the person who writes it is not concerned with why you want to bake a cake, but rather how it is done. And they were going to give you a process. They're going to give you step 1, step 2, step 3. And as you can see, it's going to be processed from one step to the other step. Another great example is 5-minute videos or craft videos. If you were to write exactly what you saw in about 5-minute craft video, you would be engaging in that process explanation. Because first you're going to write, let's say it was how to shoot a rubber band or something, and I don't know. You write the first step is connect the rubber bands to say a paper clip or something or the other. But just thinking up of something random. But if you were to write down that process, or if you were to write your morning routine, from the first thing you do to the last thing you do before you leave home, that is process explanation. And if you wrote it, that would be process writing. So moving on, we have another form of expository writing, and this is classification. And in this one, what we do is that we group things into categories to organize them. I have two great examples again. So example, if I were to tell you organize your bookshelf, or the books that you have in your house or what have you, or organize a set of books I gave you into genres, that would be an example of classification. And now that we learned some terms, if I had told you organize them into the books you use for effort reading and then the books you use for aesthetic reading, you split them in two, and the books that you gain knowledge from you put in one section, and then the books that you just enjoy reading for pleasure, you put them in the other section. Also, if I were to give you a bunch of random items and told you to organize them in your color, you put all the red ones together, then all the yellow ones together, and this is classification. You usually use classification, or a great example of using classification in actual, like day-to-day writing at school or what have you. How you use that is that you would, when you're making your points for an essay, and this also links back to the previous chapter, when you're making your points for an essay, you actually use classification to put the points together that make sense together. So you would, if you're writing on food or different types of food, you would know that you want to write a part about poultry, and then you might want to write a part about vegetables and a part about fruits. So you'd classify those points and put the ones that make sense together to write for one paragraph, and then you do that in a kind of chronological order. So that's how we really use classification in our day-to-day writing. Alright, the next form now of expository writing is comparing and contrasting. And here I have like a little activity you could do while I go through it. So, to compare you find similarities, and to contrast you find differences. So, if I were to say compare and contrast the differences between fast food and home cooked meals. So I'm going to give you a second to do that. Write all the things you can think about that you seen when you think of a home cooked meal and then a fast food meal. And then write all the things you can think that is different about a home cooked meal and a fast food meal. So I'll give you a second or so to do that. Well, 2 minutes. So we're back. So I didn't exactly type it out, but I say orally. So verbally. If I had to compare and contrast them, I would say that if I compare them, which is similarities, I'd say that the difference are the same thing when you look at a home cooked meal and a fast food meal, is that a home cooked meal use the same ingredients. If you're going to make a burger, and I'm just looking at the things on the screen here, it's going to be the same bread, same beef, same vegetables in the middle, and that is a similarity. Another similarity would be the same process to cook them. You cook, say, a burger on a grill, you would fry the chips the same way. So the process is not really going to change much. There might be a little differentiation because, hey, fast food will do things in a more industrial setting, but on a wider scale. So it might be slightly different, but it's the same process really, and same ingredients to some extent as well. Now, if I had to contrast them, I'd say, hey, home cooked meal might be healthier, or fast food is more convenient. Home cooked might be cheaper, and there you can have your contrast between a home cooked meal and fast food. Last, I think, form of expository writing is cause and effect, and this is one that we see fairly often, especially when we're given questions to write on. So, cause and effects is why something happened is the cause, and the result of that thing is the effect. So when you're thinking about this, I want you to bear in mind that there can be many effects as a result of one action. And have an example. So if a hurricane was to hit the Caribbean, or whatever, God forbid, of course, that would be the cause, right? And then the effect would be power outages, water outages, damage to infrastructure, along with many other things could be the effect. So if you were writing, let's say, a cause and effect essay, there'd be one main cause. I'm not saying there has to be one. There can be more than one, but there'd be one main cause, and then you would write on the many effects because of that. Because of whatever happened or what it is you're writing about. So we finally diagnosed expository, so we move on to argumentative and persuasive writing. So there's actually a slight difference between argumentative and persuasive, but they're one of the same. They're one of the same. But with argument writing, is defined a little different than what we know an argument to be. When we think arguing, we think raising of voices, hand gestures. We might even think violence, because of the day and age we live in. Arguments usually lead to violence. But argument writing is reasoning with a purpose of proving a truth or falsehood. Right? So when you write an argumentative essay, you're writing it in a way to show the reader, or as you go through your points, to come to a conclusion that either proves the point to be truth or false, or true or false. And persuasion writing, on the other hand, uses appeals, values, beliefs, and emotions to try to sway a reader or a listener to think or act in a certain way that they would like. So I have a really good example for this. You know what politicians do, and I'm not really talking about when they're in parliament and having discussions, but when they're actually come to the community and they're doing the speeches before election, they use very persuasive speech. They would appeal to you. Literally, when they come there, that's an appeal. They might appeal to your values. They might appeal to your beliefs. And they would even use emotion. You see that they get very animated and get really into it. And that's using emotion for persuasion. They might even say values and say that, we have this value, or appeal and say that we have this thing to do. They're very good at it. Very good. So that's the major differences there between persuasion and argument. Moving on. So moving on now, we have deductive reasoning, and this is another form of the argument writing. So deductive argument is the presentation of statements that are assumed or known to be true as a premise for a conclusion that necessarily follows from those statements. So the idea is to use a premise that is so strong that it guarantees the truth of the conclusion. The most commonly used form of deductive argument is called a syllogism. But this is a form of deductive reasoning that uses a major and minor premise to support the conclusion. So, and I have a good example here. Major premise, if my major premise is humans need food and water or will die. Fair. That is something that we can all agree is truth. And then my minor premise is that there's no food and water on the moon. So then I can conclude and say humans cannot live on the moon. Another example of this is if I say all mortals die, and then I say I am a mortal. My conclusion is that I will die eventually. So that's how this works. So you would see this fairly often, and it's like, they would answer you a question and you would almost say, well, I write in a one. You're not going to argue it when you hear the topic. Like a topic like, I can't even think of nothing offhand, but there are topics when you think that, yeah, that's true, and you can only argue in one direction. That's kind of how this works. And in there you would bring up your major and your minor premise, which will lead directly to a conclusion that you cannot exactly refute. Now, inductive reasoning is a bit different, and it's kind of hard to get the difference, but I'll do my best in explaining. Inductive reasoning is distinct from deductive reasoning because if the premises are correct in deductive reasoning, then the conclusion in deductive argument is certain. In contrast, though, the truth of the conclusion of an inductive argument is probable and is based upon the evidence given hence after. So inductive reasoning is usually used when people are conducting experiments. So before an experiment is conducted, they would have a hypothesis, which is not necessarily something that is entirely true. It's a lot of times based on opinion, but has some truth in it, and people can see that this may be true. But then they would do tests and other things along the way and prove that hypothesis or disprove it, right? It is also used in our daily lives. We use inductive reasoning all the time. I have a good example here. I would wake up and look outside and decide it's a good day to wash clothes, and I'd be pretty certain that it is a good day. But I don't really know if the day will continue being sunny and go as planned. The rain could come down pretty much at any time. But when I look outside and I see the sun, I automatically assume that, hey, this is a good day to wash clothes. And I am almost certain that it is a good day. But there's no like solid evidence behind that. But that's the type of inductive reasoning that we do. We'd see, walk down the road and see that somebody looks really upset, and we'd assume that person's having a bad day, right? And we do this inductive reasoning all the time through our daily lives, through our days. So, moving on now, we have fallacy. Now, fallacy is a mistaken belief, especially one based on faulty knowledge or reasoning. And people use fallacies a lot to convince us. So fallacies are used mainly advertisers as a deliberate marketing strategy. So you know when you see a burger and how good it looks on the advertisement and stuff like that, that's actually a fallacy, because they lead us to believe that this burger is so thick, and then we're going to be and go to Burger King, and I don't really want to call the fast food joint. And so I forgot to say that, but we go to the fast food joint now and we do get this burger and we realize that this thing just as small, and it barely fits in our pan, but yet it has looked so big on TV. That is a fallacy, deliberate marketing strategy as well. So it's used with politicians as well too. Definitely used with politicians. They give us this false hope or this false sense of this is going to happen and this, and try to convince us. So I'm going to give you some examples of some fallacies here, or how fallacies are kind of used, if you understand what I'm saying. So the first one I have is begging the question. Alright, begging the question. And what begging the question is kind of using circular reasoning. And I'll explain. I'll use an example. Suppose I begin by saying, if you want to be a manager, maths is a waste of time, right? I would then conclude and say, school is a waste of time then. Don't go to secondary school. Just go straight to UE. And that's how I use that circular reasoning, begging the question. It's almost shooting a little further than, I'm allowed to. So I say, if you're looking to be a manager, maths it doesn't make sense doing maths. And then I shoot from that, right? Because you can kind of agree and relate to that. It doesn't make sense doing maths to be, say, a human resource manager, just to be sure, because that one has less maths involved. So you would say, yeah, that could be true. So then you say, well, don't go to secondary school then. Go and do POA and POB, skip secondary school, and then just get you degree in management at UE. It's a waste of time. And I jump to this next one, and that's called circular reasoning, and it's a fallacy. And it's fallacy that we would refer to as begging the question. The next one is appealing to authority. Now this one you should be able to relate with a little better, and is more often used. So what appealing to authority means is that you call somebody name who, or it could even be a source, but it's basically using respected sources to impress the reader or listener. So if I write in my work and I quote some fancy guy with that has a doctorate and all of this, he studied all these years, then you'll be more likely to believe me, wouldn't you? Right? So we use this to kind of increase the strength for our arguments. So I would say the noted scientists are the renowned poet, and then use a quote from them and say this is why, and it will really strengthen my argument. Really strengthen my argument. So that's another fallacy, appealing to authority, because that might not always be true, I may be taking their words out of context. So it's a fallacy. The last one is appealing to pity. This one is also used a lot, and it's basically preying on sympathy to elicit a favorable response. So example, charities do this a lot too. It's not all the time that the charity doesn't have the money to support a certain cause, right? But they would make you feel that that is the case, and that was how they would convince you, And I'm not saying that all do this, but I'm just saying that that's an example of appealing to pity. So the last thing I want to go through now, we're coming to the end, is descriptive and narrative writing. So descriptive writing is the most common form of writing. We use it the most often. And just as the name suggests, it is used to describe and appeals to the five senses. That is a very, very important part of descriptive writing. It appeals to the five senses. Our sense of sight, taste, smell, touch, everything. So it is not only best at evoking an emotional response from the reader, but it also creates vivid images of what is being described in the listener or the reader's mind, right? So I think I have more on it. So there are two approaches, but before I go there, let me give you a quick example. So you know, you're reading a book and it would say that I stepped out into the beautiful field and before me there was vast when it goes into that real descriptive explanatory type, and then it appeals to your sense of smell and say the flowers smell great, it captivated my nose, and when I touched them the petals were so soft, and it gives you everything. It gives you this full picture. That is really what descriptive / narrative writing is about. So there are two approaches to descriptive writing. We have objective and we have subjective. First, objective is focused on what is being described, and it gives details like the color, the shape, and the size, right? Its purpose is to give clear, accurate, and concise information. And a superb example of this is we use this approach to descriptive writing, or speech even, when we describe a wanted suspect or a missing person, because we want that clear picture of what we don't. It doesn't involve the other senses, like smell and stuff like that. But we need that clear picture. We need to know the height, how tall, how wide the face is, the size of the ears, everything. A very clear picture, and that is what the objective description is. It's almost like looking in, being objective and just being direct. Now, subjective, on the other hand, is writing we use emotion as well, and is not only and it won't only say what something is, but also your response to it. So like before, I didn't care what my response, like I won't say that he had a face that when you see it, it makes you jump, or a scary face or anything like that. I would have just said it was a wide face with a broad nose. In your head you might think, oh, that's a kind of scary face, but no. Subjective now is where you bring in that sense of feeling and your response to it. So I have an example here, and I just said a beach, so I would remember. So I wanted to kind of give you a little, imagine you going to the beach with me. So this is how subjective writing would sound. I love going to the beach because when I get there, I can feel the sand between my toes and the cool breeze blowing off the ocean. I also look up and the sun glistens onto my face, and it gives me just enough burn, but not too much. I love the sting of the sun rays. Anything that sounds like that is subjective description. If I was doing objective, I just come and say, I love how the beach looks with its golden sand and the waves and the blue ocean is so clear I can see the bottom. But I won't really tell you my response to it. I won't tell you how it makes me feel. Alright? And that brings us to the very end of today.